Welcome, everyone. Folks are trickling in from the waiting room, but we're so glad to have you here this afternoon. And I'll kick us off today. I'm Sarah Holsconnect, Director of Sustainability here at Bellevue College, and thrilled to have us all coming together for Earth Week this week, in advance of Earth Day this coming Saturday. Our theme this year at Bellevue College is Resilience in Action, Stronger Together, where we are focusing on the interconnectedness of people and the planet to create a thriving community and a just future. We've got a great lineup of events over the course of the whole week, and I'm going to put a link in the chat where you can check out more, including an event that I should just mention right off the bat, helping keep our parks thriving tomorrow. We have an event at Robbinswood Park at 10 a.m. So do check that out if you're interested in digging in, getting your hands a bit dirty. I'll be there too. I'd like to just at the start here pause to acknowledge that Bellevue College does reside on the traditional and occupied land of the Coast Salish peoples, past, present, and future. And that includes, but is not limited to, Snoqualmie, Suquamish, Duwamish, Nisqually, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot. We honor their connection to the region, pay respect to Coast Salish elders past and present, and stand in solidarity through their struggles with continued systemic oppression. We commit to care for the land and water and center equity at the core of our unlearning. We also pause to recognize and acknowledge the labor upon which our country, state, and institution are built. We remember that our country is built on the labor of enslaved people who were kidnapped and brought to the U.S. from the African continent, and recognize the continued contribution of their survivors. We also acknowledge all immigrant labor, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented peoples who contributed to the building of the country and continue to serve within our labor force. We acknowledge all unpaid caregiving labor. And finally, we acknowledge that our institution relies on hourly, student, contingent, and unpaid labor, and we recognize those contributions. So I'd now like to introduce our guest today, Curtis, who is joining us from the city of Bellevue Parks. He is a park ranger and environmental programs coordinator there. And Bellevue, as I'm sure many of you know, is known as a city in a park with over 2,000 acres of forested parks and natural areas, and approximately 92 miles of multi-use trails with amazing forests, wetlands, streams, and meadows. And so we're really excited to hear from Curtis today and learn a little bit about the wild spaces in our parks. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Yeah, we'll definitely put in a plug for our restoration project tomorrow at Robbinswood Park at 10 a.m. I'm going to be helping host that project as well. And it fits in extremely well with the theme that Sarah was just talking about, the interconnectedness of people and wild spaces. I'd like to go for a little bit of a tour of the parks today, of the Bellevue Park system. We're going to be talking about some, not all, but some of the parks that tell us something kind of interesting and unexpected about the land, the resources, the wildlife, the fish, and the forest that our Parks Department showcases. Each of the parks I'm going to give a little theme name to, and we'll talk about it. I encourage you to enter questions into the chat as we go, and then we'll answer them at the end. That'll help you remember them, and Sarah will be helping facilitate a question and answer at the very end. For Bellevue policy, I just want to highlight that the presentation today is being recorded, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. So the very first theme park See what I did there? Theme park that I'd like to highlight is Woodridge Open Space. Now, Woodridge Open Space is very close to the downtown core in the city of Bellevue. Driving, let's say moderate traffic conditions, you can be there in 5 minutes from, the shops at Braver. We're very close, right by the intersection of 405 and Wilbert and Trussell, if y'all know where that is. And we're calling this park a forest to yourself. I'd like to illustrate that Bellevue has lots of open spaces. These aren't necessarily the same kind of parks you might be used to thinking of, but these are smaller, sometimes medium-sized properties that would otherwise not be great for development, or that the city got at various points in the past. But these spots tend to be on steeper slopes, ravines, creek borders, wetlands, wetland margins. And these are spaces that aren't as well known about, and that you can kind of have to yourself depending on when you're going. During the early days of the COVID lockdowns, my son at the time was 2.5, and he did 30 hikes in 30 days and saw a grand total of 5 people in those parks at that time. So you can really have some forest to yourself. These trails are multi-use. They're available for bird watching, running. You can bring a bicycle on them if you operate it safely. And they're a great place to go. This park right here, Woodridge Open Space, is pretty characteristic of the kind of forest that Bellevue is managing for. And that's why I chose this picture. You see that the forest here is a good mix of conifer and deciduous trees. It is a younger forest in that about 100-year-old range. And it's pretty healthy as far as noxious weeds are concerned. We have a lot of management objectives, even in a forest like this, but this is kind of what we're shooting for many of our sites. If you can see my cursor, this would be a good parking spot, the very end of Southeast 9th Place. Right up over here is the Wilbert and Trussell. And you can also get to a lot of these open spaces from several of the neighborhoods. So they're a great place to go recreate. The next theme park that I'd like to talk about is the old growth theme. And Weona Park is where most of Bellevue's old growth trees are. Old growth is a little bit of a term that's not used as often anymore. Some people will say old forest, older forest. But old growth is in some ways a good way to think about it, because these trees aren't necessarily ancient looking. They don't always at first glance look like, Redwoods National Park or giant sequoias, but they do have growth characteristics that let you know that these trees are hundreds of years old. So these are 2 examples of old growth trees in Weona Park. The tree on the left is a western red cedar. The tree on the right is a Douglas fir. Most of the old growth in this park and throughout the Bellevue Park system are Douglas fir. This is a park ranger. This is Kaylee here in the foreground. She's standing next to a pretty regular sized old growth tree for this park. So the tree on the left, the red cedar, the way we can tell that this tree is old growth is, again, the growth characteristics. So we have very few branches in those lower portions of the tree. And you can't see it very well in this picture, but up top, there's lots of dead spires. So lots of places where the tree was growing and then died back, and it put new shoots up, growing and died back, growing and died back. And the effect is sometimes referred to as a candelabra, if you know what that is. And then this tree we see even pretty high up in the canopy has large branches. That's another thing we look for when we want to know if a tree is old growth. This is a Douglas fir low, pretty much at standard height. We see a couple things that let us know that it's old growth right off the bat. So one, the bark is very thick and corky, so that bark had to build up over the years. And we also see charcoal in that thick, corky bark. And charcoal and scorch marks on trees are a good way for us, especially if they're deep in the forest, a good way for us to know that that tree is older. So, you know, it survived the logging at the, you know, the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, when most of it in the east side was first done. So thick bark, large diameter, scorched appearance down low. We can also see with this tree, large branches up high in the canopy. We can see clear wood down low. We don't have little branches sticking out, which would indicate that it grew in full sun. And we see right here, Douglas fir, when they get really old, this is called epicormic branching, where it's trying to take advantage of the light by making this kind of gnarled fan-like growth. So this is one example. Here's another one, this large branch up high in the tree. Old growth trees tend to kind of hit a height maximum, and then especially in our area, and then they start to just get large features in the biomass that is there already. So large diameter, large branches, and they just get bigger and bigger and bigger rather than taller and taller and taller. It's kind of a good fit with the theme of your Earth Week this week. Again, it is our Bellevue Naturalist volunteers for the past 2 years have dedicated themselves to doing restoration treatments at this area of Weona Park. So we've got about 3 zones with significant amounts of old growth trees in them. They're not, you know, virgin forest. They've been cut. They've had disturbance, but there's a lot of those older growth trees in there. And the Bellevue Naturalist volunteers have completed restoration on a 3-acre zone. They're about halfway through another 3-acre zone. And then we have on the list another about 3.5 acre zone that we'd like to get to in the next 2 years or so. So these forests, primarily the treatments that we're doing are removing English ivy, English holly, English laurel, and cherry laurel, Portuguese laurel. Those trees and woody plants, if left unchecked, will really degrade and ultimately destroy this old growth forest resource. So volunteers, contracted work, professional staff are all critical in maintaining the health of Bellevue's urban forests. So we want to recognize these volunteers who've done an amazing job at this old growth area. If you want to visit it and see some of these trees, you're pretty close. Your campus at Bellevue College is very close, 168th Avenue Southeast. There's street parking in some of these neighborhoods. There's just a couple of spots right here by the trailhead. And if you go in here, you'll be right in the old growth zone, right, which is kind of right in the middle of the park. There's a waterfall right here. There's the other old growth zones are a little harder to find and are kind of off trail, but really good, easy ways to find them. You can also park along Westlake Sammamish Parkway Southeast and hike up the hill, but this is an extremely steep hill. So if you're just going to see the trees, I'd recommend parking along 168th Avenue Southeast. Here's a nice video we got from one of our game cameras that we put in the forest. This is a bobcat. It's kind of funny. He looks just like a regular cat if you don't know what you're looking for. But we can see those large paws. We can see the spots on his legs. And bobcats are very curious. This is how they trap them for research or for the fur market, is, you know, just things that will pique a cat's curiosity. Here's that color view from the couple days before the other video. Bobcats in our area, the spots on their backs and sides are not very pronounced. So folks will often report these as cougar, and they're quite large too. They're the size of maybe like a medium to large size dog, and they stand pretty high. So you look for the tail, and also the ears tend to be that black with the white spot. So bobcats are pretty common in our park system, but there's just kind of a cool thing that's here deep in the city of Bellevue in the Lake Hills Greenbelt neighborhood. Here's another video of a cool animal. This is a mountain beaver. They're a rodent. They're not related closely to beavers. They dig extensive tunnel systems and are really important for ecosystem functions by aerating the ground, by moving dirt around, by creating these tunnel systems that other wildlife can eventually use. Here's another video of another species that's taken advantage of this. So that's a Peromyscus mouse. We have two species of Peromyscus mice in Bellevue. So this is a native mouse species that's utilizing the same burrow that the mountain beaver made. Mountain beavers, you can find them by their burrow systems, and they'll often clip vegetation down low by their burrows. So kind of a cool animal. And then another cool wildlife feature at Weona Park is it's a great spot to see eagles. It's on the hill above Lake Sammamish, which is really good foraging habitat for the eagles. And then those old growth trees make a great spot to put nests. So this is a nest right here. And the old growth trees and the tall trees, they also like to perch in those. So Weona Park is a great spot to see it, and especially hear eagles if you can learn what their sounds are actually like. Most of the time, if you think you know what an eagle sounds like from the movies, that's probably a red-tailed hawk that you're hearing. So learn the eagle sound, and you'll hear it everywhere in a park like this. Okay, our next theme park is Paddle in the Park at the Mercer Slough Nature Park. Our ranger staff lead guided canoe tours during the summer season. I led them for a couple of years when I first started in the department, and you know, you really get the sense that you're deep in the wilderness when you are paddling in this park. It's the largest wetland contiguous to Lake Washington. It goes the entire length of the park, has paddling all the way through it. It's very shallow, and motorboats aren't allowed anyway, and very few would want to try this just from a safety point of view. You can see green herons, great blue herons, band-tailed pigeons, otter, beaver. It's just a really cool spot. And every once in a while, you'll come around a bend and you'll see the skyscrapers of downtown Bellevue. So this park is literally in the watershed of about half of the downtown core area of Bellevue. So this is a spot where you can paddle and you can feel like you're deep in the, you know, the Alaskan wilderness or the, you know, the upper Midwest. And then, you know, you kind of get reminded that you're here right in the middle of the city. It's a really cool park. You can, here's another view. This right here is a blueberry farm. You can do a U-pick during the summer season. There's hiking trails, really good bird watching. It's if you go early in the morning, it's a great place to see beaver and river otter. And like I said, we do those guided ranger tours as well, so that you can kind of know and learn a little bit more about what you're looking at. So really cool park, really cool opportunity. There's two places to put in: the Swaylocken boat launch, which is just here off Bellevue Way, and the Inatai Beach Park. You definitely want to look online to see what the latest conditions are for those parks. Sound Transit construction and a King County pipe replacement project are kind of ongoing, and it's led to intermittent closures. So just kind of keep an eye on what's happening with that construction and closures, but really great park to go do some canoeing. It's just a great spot. Okay, our next theme in the theme park is birding Bellevue, and you can watch birds anywhere within the Bellevue Park system, but I'd like to highlight the Lake Hills Greenbelt as a great place to go. These are cormorants. They're one of the, this is the best place in the city of Bellevue to see cormorants, swans, ducks. And the reason is that it's got a variety of habitats all connected by a pretty flat, comfortable trail system with lots of access points. So when you go bird watching, if you want to see a lot of birds, you need to put yourself in a lot of different habitat types. So we've got up here, we've got a lake, we've got access to Phantom Lake and Larson Lake. This area right here is pretty mature conifer forest. There are you know, deciduous forests here and here. And there are two places to watch birds on the lake from shore, which is really nice as well. So great place to go bird watching. You know, we even do some programs at this park, depending on the time of the year. And there's ranger-led walks here out of the Lake Hills Greenbelt Ranger Station as well. So good place to go bird watching. So I'd like to talk to you about the tree cave at Lewis Creek Park. This is a really cool spot in the Bellevue Park system up in the Lakemont neighborhood. This is a very unnatural forest feature, but these are all native plants and it's extremely beautiful. So you can see in the background here, these stumps are the old growth red cedars that were logged around the turn of the century. And when that was done in this site, the understory trees were just left. So these are the vine maples. These would have been an understory tree. When the understory was removed, when the overstory was removed, the understory became the new overstory and created this very old cave of trees. It's a really cool place to see wildflowers, especially this time of the year. There's a ton of bleeding heart in there, young ferns, trillium. It's just a really cool spot. Excuse me for just one moment, please.
I'm curious if folks have visited these places. Maybe if you have, put a favorite spot that you visited in the chat. So I'm certainly learning about quite a few new spots at parks that I've been to before. So please share if you've been to one of these places and have already experienced some of this cool stuff that Curtis is talking us through.
Thank you, Sarah. And this is the park I'm based out of. We do environmental programming out of this park year round. It's 56 acres, great parking, easy access right from the highway. There's even a pretty flat trail that you can do if you have limited mobility or if you have a stroller. It's a great spot to go. That's kind of easy to access nature. And like I said, this is everyone's favorite spot in the park and a lot of people's favorite spot in the Bellevue Park system. So again, just to reiterate, because I kind of lost focus there for a moment, these were the understory layer that after logging became the overstory layer, and they just got bigger and bigger and bigger and led to this very unusual kind of forest condition. If you want to visit it, it's just north of the picnic area in Lewis Creek Park. This half-mile loop right here is very easy to access. Most of it is hard surface. Much of it's paved and boardwalk. So it doesn't meet the legal definition of ADA accessible, but most folks that we've talked to with wheelchairs can access it, and it's a pretty good option. And also, like I said, strollers, young children, it's a great place. Lewis Creek Park is like one of the better parks in our system for deer. This area has some large natural areas, a lot of smaller neighborhood open spaces, a lot of steep slopes with forests on it. And then Lewis Creek Park itself has lots of kind of brushy and open areas, and black-tailed deer really like that kind of habitat type. It's also a pretty good spot to encounter bears. But if you want to see deer, especially go early in the morning before all the dogs and off-leash use happens, which is against the park code, but the best time of the day to see wildlife is going to be in the morning, and especially if you can beat the crowd there. I will take a moment to mention these spotted fawns are particularly vulnerable to disturbance, both by dogs and by people. So when they're first born, the reason they have these spots is to act as camouflage, and they don't run. They'll just sit in on the ground and hope that whatever predator is nearby doesn't see them. So if you find one of these, leave them be. Every year, people will pick them up and try and, quote unquote, save them. And they end up, separating it from the doe and will kill that animal. So leave spotted fawns alone and keep your dogs on a leash so that we can keep, our deer population healthy and not disturbed. So Bellevue is also a great place to go fishing. The city of Bellevue doesn't have regulatory authority to manage wildlife, but we do have the responsibility and authority to manage our habitats. So, fishing seasons are set by the state of Washington, by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So if you do want to go fishing, just make sure that you are, reading the regulations, that you have your fishing license, and that your, your gear is legal and everything. But there's some great places to go. Most of our beach parks, at least for portions of them, allow fishing. And then Larson Lake and Phantom Lake, which I mentioned earlier, are also a really nice place to go fishing. At Phantom Lake, you can get a free self-issue boating permit at the boat launch here, which you can see in the background of this picture, and you can launch non-motorized craft. It's a pretty large lake, and it's a great place to go fishing. Same thing with right here. This is also on Phantom Lake. This is a pier that sticks out into over the water, and we treat these. This noxious vegetation is treated annually so that you can fish. And then also Larson Lake has a pier like this as well. There's even some places to get rid of your used fishing line so that it doesn't end up in the environment. So if you want to go fishing, Larson Lake, Phantom Lake, Bellevue Beach Parks, all good options. Just make sure you've got your fishing license and make sure that you're doing it legally according to the state of Washington. And here's that boat launch location that you can bring your canoe, kayak, stand-up paddleboard, rowboat, whatever, and you can get deeper out into Phantom Lake and do some fishing. It's pretty close to y'all as well at Bellevue College. So the Backyard Wilderness is Coal Creek Natural Area. This is the largest park in our system. It's 480 acres. It is the longest trail that you can do. It's pretty wild. The creek runs all the way from the tip top, which is near Lakemont Boulevard Southeast and Cougar Mountain Regional Park. So that's at the uphill site, and then it runs all the way down to 405 at the lower end. This park is a big corridor for bear, bobcat, deer, and like I said, it's our largest park. And I'll highlight this. It's a big corridor from wildlife coming from Cougar Mountain Regional Park up through these little open spaces. And bear especially like to access these neighborhoods to eat garbage and bird feeders and stuff, and access it using Coal Creek Park. And it's a good reminder that even in the city, we want to go prepared into the parks. This one is a good example of something, you should be a little bit more prepared for because it's a longer hike. So, navigation is a huge one, just knowing where you are. And you can download the My Bellevue app, and it's got a whole trail layer for our park system, sun protection and sunscreen, clothing, wearing the right layers depending on the time of the year. A lot of people forget headlamps, but if you misjudge how fast you are, even in an urban park, it's a good thing to have extra food and extra water, especially if you've got younger kids that are hiking with you, are a good thing to remember. So some of the Bellevue parks and really Coal Creek, you want to do a little bit more preparation for to make sure you have a good time. Here's a couple videos from our game camera. This is black bear. It's up near kind of by Cougar Mountain Regional Park. But this is in the park. Here's a coyote in that same area. We've gotten bobcats. We've never gotten one in our park, but people have sent us video of cougars. nearby. So it's definitely a wild space, and you want to make sure to keep your dog on a leash again. Be aware of your surroundings, and maybe don't wear the earbuds. Just wildlife aren't gonna hurt you, but you don't want to startle each other. So just a good reminder to kind of be aware of your surroundings while you're hiking. Oh, and Coal Creek is also the healthiest salmon stream in Bellevue. So especially if you're hiking down a little farther downstream near Coal Creek Parkway, you may see some of these signs that we put up when the salmon are actually in the creek. And it's just reminding us, stay out of the water. It's illegal to catch these fish when they're spawning like this. Keep your dog on a leash. And basically just trying to do everything we can to give these salmon a leg up and keep the disturbance away from them so that they can breed successfully. If you're, I wanted to highlight what I call the training hill, Lakemont Community Park and Open Space. It's in the Lakemont neighborhood, kind of by the Town and Country, if you know where that is. And our parks are multi-use, and like I said, they're available for trail running, for hiking, bird watching. And if you want to really get your heart rate going and you want to maybe avoid some of the crowds at Mount Si or Cougar Mountain, or Mailbox Peak, consider doing 4 or 5 up and downs on this section of hill at Lakemont Community Park and Open Space. It's pretty steep. It's very pretty forest. It's pretty healthy, mixed canopy with a lot more red cedars and maples in this area, and it is pretty steep. So if you wanted to, you can also do the circuit right here. So this is along a stream, or you could just go up this super steep section of hill a couple of times and get your heart rate up and get some training and exercise done. Bring your dog and get them tired out as well. I'd like to highlight this park. It's actually not, this spot that we're looking at isn't actually a park. It's a transportation right of way, but it's right, each of these spots that I'm going to mention are right by a Bellevue park. And it's a really interesting spot. This is the Mercer Slough Fish Ladder, or maybe you may hear it called the Kelsey Creek Fish Ladder. Lake Washington has had a long and interventionist history with the lake levels and kind of engineering. And this fish ladder helps kind of address some of those historical abuses to the lake. And it provides passage from Lake Washington through the Mercer Slough up the level that's needed, and then goes under 405 and provides access to fish for the Kelsey Creek watershed. This watershed salmon populations are just in dismal shape. It's a highly urbanized, watershed, lots of impervious surfaces, lots of development, and it's not a great place to see salmon anymore. But you can observe salmon here. It's also a really cool spot. This is just on the other side of the fish ladder. If you were to go under 405, we're now in Kelsey Creek on the upstream side. That's the Wilburton Trestle in the background. And we'll just let this video play for a sec. These are peamouth minnows, and these fish live in Lake Washington in the slack water, but they breed in these fast-moving streams. So in the spring, it depends on the way that we're getting rains each year, but they'll run in these huge schools, and they'll do these big breeding events right here at a spot. There's a little pathway that's marked. There's little steps that lead down to the creek so that you can see them, and they will literally blanket the stream bed with golden orange eggs after they've spawned, and then they all go back down to Lake Washington. But it's a really cool thing to see, just thousands and thousands of them all at once when the conditions are right. Again, these are called peamouth minnows. And the reason it's really cool to see is that it's a hold on a sec. It's a big draw for predators. So here's a great blue heron that somebody got on one of our cameras a few years ago. But eagles, kingfishers, osprey, great blue herons, river otter, raccoons, even bobcat will go fishing when there's a lot of fish in the creek. It's a really cool time to go watch wildlife during these runs. So these guys tend to start going around around this time of the year, depending on when the weather is right and when the stream flow is right. So it's a really cool place to go do some nature watching. So here's the Mercer Slough fish ladder right here at the terminus of the Mercer Slough. It comes up a few feet and goes all the way under 405 and pops out here by the Wilbert and Trestle. And this section of stream right here is where you just saw that video. And this is where the peamouth minnows love to spawn. It's right here by the West Kelsey open space and Woodridge open space that we started with at the beginning of this talk. But again, really cool place to see wildlife. And then I'd like to end on the theme park of Wild in the City. You can't get much more city than Bellevue Downtown Park, but even here, there's wildlife. This is a park that you can sometimes see peregrine falcon hunting, rock doves or pigeons, hunting ducks, crows, especially the younger ones. It's a good place to see seagulls, ducks that are wild animals, but are pretty much spend their whole life in the park. But even in downtown park, if you go during the winter months, and this is during the spring a few years ago, these are migratory widgeons right here. And when it gets really wet, and it's during certain times during the migration, you can see hundreds of widgeons all just rooting around on the turf grass. And it's kind of a cool place to watch wildlife. You can see osprey here, like I said, every once in a while, peregrine. But this is a park in an area where there's a lot of condos and apartments, and it's even here you can watch your wildlife. We do encourage, and it is against the park code to feed wildlife. You can end up in situations like this park guest here was bringing in buckets of cracked corn twice a day, and this can really lead to some problems with resource degradation, wildlife that come up and beg from people and then get killed by dogs, or lose their fear of humans and get hit by cars. Or this is actually this is a condition we don't want to see for disease transmission as well. So don't feed wildlife in the Bellevue parks. Let them eat their wild food. But you'll still be able to see wildlife in any Bellevue park, even without feeding them. So help them stay wild, and this will keep them alive longer, actually, if we don't do this. So, and I'd like to end here. This park is Ardmore Park. It's kind of the Redmond Bellevue border. Even here in the middle of this neighborhood park, there's wildlife out there. You may not see it on any given trip into a park, but it's there. Take your time, learn to kind of look at the forest, learn to listen to the birds, learn to look in the creeks, and you'll see a lot more wild things even here in your neighborhood Bellevue Park than you might expect. And at that, I would love to field some questions, whatever question you've ever wanted to ask a park ranger, any of the stuff we talked about, any of these park locations, or maybe you have a favorite Bellevue park that you want to ask about. I'd be happy to field those questions. So thank you for your time.
Wonderful. And thank you, Curtis. That was so interesting to see some of these unique places that maybe we haven't visited before. So I'd invite folks to drop a question in the chat or in the Q&A function. If you'd like to unmute, you can also do that to ask a question. And I can kick it off. I'm curious about, and maybe this, I don't know if this is a trick question. Do you know the origin of the name We Own a Park?
Yes, it sounds like vaguely Native American, but it is actually a squashing together of we own a park. We own a park. It'll ruin your spell check no matter what platform you're using. And it was proposed by the neighbors to that park, who let's see here, who advocated for that park decades ago. So yes, we own a park. It's an unusual name for sure. So.
Okay, I was wondering if that was where it came from. So thanks for clarifying. We have a question here. Are there any kinds of edible foods you can forage for in Bellevue forests?
Yeah, and this time of the year, it's about to start getting pretty good. So I would say I would highlight two things. One, I would highlight the variety of berries that we have in our park system. And you can forage and take non-commercial quantities of berries in the park system. Commercial quantities, we're talking like you're bringing 5-gallon buckets and you're planning on selling those in the marketplace. That's not allowed, but collecting berries for your own personal use is allowed. There are several species. One of the first ones to kind of come into fruit would be salmonberry. That's one that not a lot of people target, and it's kind of got a little bit of a bitter taste, but they make nice large berries. They're very easy to collect right from a lot of trails. So salmonberry, we have a native species of blackberry called trailing blackberry. Salal, if y'all know what salal is, it's everywhere, especially in kind of more common conifer dominated sites. And the berries on that look disgusting, and they're a little bit seedy, but they taste wonderful. So I always recommend those as well. Huckleberries, red huckleberries are very small, but they're quite tasty. Thimbleberries are another one. What I would recommend against is foraging for mushrooms, because you're actually removing the fruiting body of that organism. And the way I kind of tend to think about park uses is if one person did it, most actions would not be damaging to the resource. But I like to think about, is this behavior sustainable if 100,000 people a year do it? And with berries, we're going to just be taking the berries right along the trail corridor. And yeah, we'll run out of berries, but it's sustainable. With things where we have to dig, with things where we're removing the fruiting bodies, like with mushrooms, obviously something like collecting firewood. If 100,000 people did it, it would severely damage the resource. So the other thing I would highlight, again, would be fishing, the opportunity within the Bellevue Park system. Fishing, most of the fish that people are targeting in Bellevue are going to be introduced aquatic species. So largemouth, smallmouth bass, pumpkin seed, perch, these are fish that are not indigenous to the Pacific Northwest, but are pretty tasty. And you should, in addition to making sure you're being legal when you're fishing, if you're at higher risk, like if you're pregnant, if you're eating a lot of fish, you probably want to check on just the water quality and see what the recommendations are from the state as far as eating out of that body of water. So yeah, especially pregnant folks, people who are nursing, or people who are eating a lot of fish should probably check on that. So those are what I would highlight there.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. We have a few comments in the chat that there's lots of salal at Bellevue College. Like you said, it's all over in our area, right? So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And we have someone else saying they love to hear all about the nature and birds. I don't know if we see any other questions. I'm curious, do you have a most unusual or favorite wildlife encounter that you've had in your experience working in the parks?
Oh, well, that's like asking a kid what he wants to be when he grows up.
Sure.
That video that you saw of the mountain beaver, of all those videos, that was the most difficult to get. As you can imagine, they have numerous burrow entrances. Everything likes to eat those guys. It's extremely hard to focus those cameras on them. I was really proud to get that video. It was a lot of work to get that one, but I've encountered bear before on the trail, which is all, gets your heart racing. But I'd say probably my favorite is a few weeks ago, I took my now 5-year-old son to go look at that bald eagle nest at Weona Park. And that was just so cool. So watching eagles and osprey is always a really neat opportunity, even for kids, even for grownups. Like it's just fun. So yeah, I would say that would be my favorite.
Yeah, that is always so wonderful, especially bringing young ones to see bald eagles and all the wildlife. There was a question someone had.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir. I see 2 questions that I can highlight if that's okay.
Please do, yeah.
So the first one is a question about Bellevue Botanical Gardens. Yeah, Bellevue Botanical Garden is an interesting site. It is it's a large area. There are deer there. The person asked about that. I'm not sure what the exact question was there, but yes, there's a ton of wildlife there. It is a location at the Bellevue Botanical Garden that dogs are not allowed, even on leash. The nearby Wilburton Hill Park, which is Bellevue Botanical Gardens, is like carved out of that park. Dogs are allowed there on leash. Good wildlife. We've been doing some quite a lot of restoration treatments at that site, and that bleeds into the next question, which was, is the Bellevue Park System facing any challenges or issues? Yes, I'd like to highlight 2. The first one is non-native noxious weed species. Urban parks have a lot more disturbance than, let's say, we're deep in the Cascade Mountains. These are parks where people are recreating, where there was more intense and damaging logging, where there are dogs running everywhere. But one of the things that is really difficult is every homeowner not everyone, but lots of them that abut a Bellevue Park, especially in older neighborhoods when this, this tended to happen more. They dump their yard waste into the park, and it doesn't seem like it would be a problem, but that yard waste will often start to grow in the parks. And urban forests really struggle with noxious weed infestations. Bellevue has numerous species that we struggle with. One of those would be English ivy. You have it everywhere on your campus. That's what we'll be doing in our volunteer project tomorrow, is treating, hand pulling English ivy. English holly is one that you can see everywhere. That's a noxious weed, and will these plants they're not just neutral on the landscape. They will really lead to decreased species richness on a particular spot of forest. We have lots of non-native species. Those 2 are 2 big ones that we deal with. So we talked about non-native noxious weed species. Another one would be just the non-native forest pests that a global society is bringing, just fungal species and insects from all over the world, and every year there's a new insect or fungal pest that is going to become a long-term issue for us to manage. and to do our best with to keep these forests going into the future. Maples are dealing with big leaf maples have 2 fungal pathogens that are really, really damaging those trees. And finally, I'd like to highlight climate change. I mean, some of the tree species that have been associated with the Pacific Northwest, like we have moved away from planting hemlock into our forest system because they die of drought and heat stress after a few years of being in the being on the landscape. That's the state tree of Washington. Some sites will, and I remember reading something a few years ago that Douglas fir will be out of its niche in a lot of these areas, especially drier sites. So climate change and between climate change and these, introduced pathogens and pests, the forest is in a crisis, I would say. Not just a challenge. I would call it an existential crisis. And, the forest that my children have in, 50 years is going to look very different than the one that we see today. And it's going to require everyone to do a lot to do what they can, essentially, in the forest. So yes, a lot of issues facing our park system.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting those. I think that's super important to be thinking about as we're enjoying these places. And on that note, if anyone here would like to come get their hands dirty with us tomorrow, 10 a.m., I'm going to put the link to sign up in the chat. We'll be at Robbinswood Park, which is just across the street from campus, so real close. And so yeah, looking forward to that. Hopefully we'll see some of you there. And we've zoomed in quite local with this session. At 2:30 we're going to be zooming out a little bit, and we're going to be visualizing Washington State's geology. So you can check out our Earth Week schedule and sign up for other events. I'll put that in the chat as well. But wanted to say huge thank you to Curtis for sharing all of this good stuff about our local parks. And I'm really looking forward to going and visiting some of these unique areas that I didn't know about before. So thank you, Curtis. Really appreciate it.
And thank all of y'all for taking the time, and warms a park ranger's heart to see people in the woods. So I hope to see you out there. So
wonderful. Well, thanks very much. And Curtis, I'll see you tomorrow at Robbinswood.
See you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.